America has fallen in love with the 430 movie. Have you? Check it out at 430movie.com or wherever you listen to your podcasts. Hey, this is Mark A. Altman.
And this is Darren Doctorman, and we are
the Inglorious Treksperts. And we are so happy to be here with two very special guests and regulars on the show.
What are they, guests or regulars? What do you...
Regular guests.
I guess they have a lot of brand.
It takes 10 bowls of total.
Wow.
Oh, God. Anyway.
What are they?
I'm about to tell you. Thank you for asking. Our regular commentator, Trekspert extraordinaire, the director, co-writer, and editor of the beloved Star Trek homage, Free Enterprise, and also man behind such the special features on the Star Trek The Next Generation Blu-rays, as well as Enterprise, and producer on Agent Cody Banks. And he is the host and producer of the new Robservations on YouTube, Mr. Robert Meyer Burnett.
It's good to be here. It's good to be talking Trek with you once again.
Indeed.
And we have the writer and producer on such shows as Fringe, Terminator, the Sarah Connor Chronicles. He has the new season of Lore dropping right now on Amazon, and he will soon be going back to the age of the Riddle of Steel with Red Sonja. You know him as Evil. We know him as Ashley E. Miller. And welcome back.
Thank you. It's good to be back.
Ashley is
welcome
joining
back
us
for the first time.
Right? We're caught in a recursive time loop.
Ashley, of course, is a familiar face to us from the 430 movie, and he has kindly decided to share his knowledge and love of Star Trek for the Inglorious Treksperts.
Well, nobody else will let me do it.
There you go. And today's going to be a fun episode because we're going to talk about Star Trek toys.
Toys.
Or as Carrie Guffey said in Close Encounters, toys.
The greater the mind, the
That's a little
greater
creepy.
the need for play.
Yeah.
The simplicity of play.
The charts show a meteorite field. We have to change course. Activate the Star Trekulator. Check.
Now you can play Star Trek with the Star Trekulator, a digital calculator that never makes a mistake. Batteries not included.
Take these numbers. 6,000. 6,000. Check. Divide by 12. Check. And that finishes the homework for the day.
The Star Trekulator adds, multiplies, divides, and subtracts by Mego.
You know, let's start from the beginning. I mean, when you were a kid,
Good place.
what were the cool,
The first Star Trek toy I ever saw was also the worst packaged one. It was called the Tracer gun, and it had the Star Trek logo on it, and it had cut-out pictures of Kirk and Spock on it, and it had nothing whatsoever to do with Star Trek. But it was one of these. Some toy company said, "Oh, let's just put this. We'll put the Star Trek thing on it. Kids will buy it." I did, and I had it, and it was like this sort of gold plastic gun that you would put these tiny little discs in, and you would load it up, and you would shoot them across the room and probably hurt someone.
With Kirk
It
or
was
Spock, though.
awesome.
Okay.
Because it worked great.
It did.
If you remember, it had a spring-loaded clip.
Yeah.
It was like a bullet clip, so you could load in
You load
10
in
of them
10
and pack them down, and the
You could put
spring
the whole
would
crew in there.
and it fed the mechanism fed into the
Yeah.
It was great.
And it worked really well, and it shot him out.
Imagine if Kirk had had that in Arena.
Yeah.
See, people think this whole phenomena of rebranding toys that have nothing to do with the subject is something new. It's like Star Trek Clue, or Star Wars Monopoly, or all this stuff. But this stuff went all the way back to, it's Davy Crockett chess set. It's
And they also had a small handgun, and then they later made a rifle,
Right.
of like a phaser rifle, which was awesome too. But you lost the tracers.
Yeah.
Lasted.
No,
they
they
were gone
You
the first
shot him
day.
out once, and where's that? I don't know.
Yeah.
Luckily, I got a bunch more.
You were exercising your Second Amendment rights to carry a phaser, huh?
That's right.
It was incredible.
Even without any kind of training or.
But
license.
the great thing, I got more enjoyment out of the packaging of it than the gun itself, because I would trace the Star Trek logo on it, and I would trace the pictures of Kirk and Spock, and it was more fun for me, drawing from that than actually playing with the gun.
So you could trace your
You got your
whole
ass kicked a lot,
career
didn't you?
as a successful concept artist in Hollywood
To
the
that
Star
moment.
Trek
Yeah,
tracer gun.
actually, I can. Wow. Yeah,
Look at that.
that's where it all began, and who'd have known from those small beginnings what an empire I've developed?
Because, of course, for those of you who are just joining the show, Darren, of course, is a concept designer who's worked on such shows as Westworld Season 2, The Chronicles of Riddick, Real Steel.
A bunch of others,
Bunch
over
of-
80 stuff over the past 30 years.
Yeah,
but
so I'm not going to go through the whole list
no,
because we'd
please
be out
don't.
of time.
Find me on IMDb.
There you go. Or on Twitter at Darren Doc. And
one R.
so that was your first toy. So, Rob, what do you remember going back to your days as a wee lad? What was your first Star Trek toy? You
Well, the obvious answer would be the Mego action figures, but no. My favorite Star Trek toys were the AMT model kits.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
And I probably built, first of all, when I first was building them, I think I was 5 or 6 because I was already building models. And they were, I got glue fingerprints all over them. But I built probably over the course of my life 30 AMT model enterprises because as I got older,
Each one got better and better.
each one got better and better. And then they finally released, I want to say after 70, it was after 75, it was after the Franz Joseph technical manual came out. They released all the names of the ships, the 12, the Constitution
Actually, it was
class.
before that. It was before that.
Was it before that?
Because I remember in like 73 or 74 when I got my first AMT box, it had all of the
Okay,
ones in it.
then I had to build all of them.
Yeah.
And at one point, my mother was
One
incensed.
big happy fleet.
Well, she hated the fact. She's like, "Why are you buying more of the same model?" And I'm like,
Because
"Mom,
they're
it's-
not the same.
It's not the same. This is the Exeter. This is the Hood.
The
This is
Constellation with
this is the-
authentic battle damage.
Yeah, the Potemkin and the Intrepid. And my
This is
mom's
the
like,
Congo that no one's ever seen.
Well, the Potemkin wasn't really a starship. It's just
was a
that British
battleship.
intelligence thought it was.
yeah, and then of course you did things like you had to make your burnt up Doomsday Machine
Sure.
Constellation.
yeah.
And that I also did multiple versions of because once I figured out you could put like styrene in
Right,
the ship
for
and
the
then to
decks
make the
and-
different decks and then burn it out.
Yeah.
So it was, and that became, I probably did 3 or 4 of those.
Yeah.
And they got better and better and better. So, and then of course they made the Galileo, and then they did
Did
the
you walk in your room
exploration.
and go, the Constellation, she's been destroyed?
Well, they did the exploration set where
Right.
you finally got a phaser, a communicator, and a tricorder, which
But
were all
they
too
were
small.
small.
They were too
But
small.
but not for kids our size.
Yeah.
Right, that
They
was
were
the-
perfect for us.
Right.
My uncle got me that set, and he built them for me, and he put a little light in the phaser.
Oh, wow.
And it was the best thing ever.
My brother built like an entire armory full of phasers and enough equipment for an entire starship crew, and just handed it out to his friends.
That's awesome.
See, that's a really
yeah.
cool thing because it's not like now where like, you throw a rock and you hit a Star Trek toy. You can get it on the internet. I mean, to have the phaser and the tricorder and any, it was just amazing, particularly for those of you who I'm sure you all did played Star Trek as kids.
Oh, yeah.
On the schoolyard. and
Remember,
stuff.
this was the Dark Ages. Okay, this was before the internet. This was
Before the Empire.
Before the Empire. The amount of stuff that just was sneaking out of Star Trek was primarily because of the animated show. That's what sort of instituted like all the Mego dolls and the expansion of the model kits, because originally they only put out the Enterprise, but it was sort of the beginning of this, like we talked about before, this fan base that was hungering for more Star Trek because it wasn't being made.
I love that eventually that AMT model kit was sort of like the last straw for Roddenberry because it's the one of Spock where he's the phaser and he's shooting the snake on the box.
The three-headed snake.
The three-headed Hydra snake that he has and like Roddenberry, like there are memos about this. If you go and look at his the archives, as I did for the 50-year mission, he was very upset about the depiction of violence against an alien species, which of course he later would say ad nauseum about Star Trek II when they killed the SETI eel. Like, what did he say?
I don't remember.
Well, he basically said that they wouldn't just so casually destroy an alien life form without trying to stay.
Alien life forms are very honorable, and we should try our best to understand them first and then destroy them later.
Yeah,
Well, I
especially
don't-
the ones that crawl inside of the
Right,
ear
yeah,
canal,
the ear
wrap
canal.
themselves around the cerebral cortex
After
and
they
make us
made
do things.
Captain Terrell kill himself.
Frankly,
Yeah.
I think Chekhov's performance improved with the eel in his head.
Yeah.
But that brings up a good point. Even as a kid, like when licensed properties started, you started to get more and more things. Like we got the Corgi toy of the James Bond things. Those were very cool. But when they would make things that were just supposed to appeal to kids, like Spock firing a phaser at a three-headed dragon,
Right.
I thought to myself, that isn't even from an episode.
Right.
I was insulted by what they would do. And they would make these toys and slap Star Trek on them. Even when Mego finally came out and made the 8-inch action figures, which each came with a communicator and a phaser, it was great to have them. But when I finally got the bridge placed, I'm like, this doesn't look anything like the bridge. Like, do they think I'm stupid as a child?
They do.
Yes.
I
And
know
they
they
did.
did. And they never understood the fact that kids, we wanted things to look as realistic and as close to what we were watching on TV as possible. And in the 70s,
Why didn't they use the Trekulator in the show?
They
I'm
never-
not buying a Trekulator.
they never gave us, I mean, I remember getting, even though it's a little off topic, the first land speeder toy for this 3 3/4-inch Star Wars figures. I'm like, it's too short. The canopy is too high. Why doesn't it look like the land speeder in the movie?
Right.
Just so they can give you some spring-loaded special feature. As a kid, I always felt insulted with licensed toys. Now we live in a golden age
I was
where
just going to say, yeah.
they're making them beautiful reproductions of exactly what you saw on screen.
And they scan the actors so the likenesses are like pitch
Incredible.
perfect. I mean,
Scary.
it's
But
incredible.
back then, it was as if my mother would always be upset that I wasn't as excited about this toy. I wanted this toy so badly. When I would get it, there was always disappointment on my
It's
face.
so funny you say that because I'm thinking about those Mego aliens.
Mego presents the Star Trek action figures featuring the crew of the Enterprise. Captain James T. Kirk, their fearless leader. Dr. Bones McCoy, caring for the health of the Enterprise crew. Scotty, chief engineer, in charge of the transporter room. Mr. Spock, the Vulcan first officer. Lieutenant Uhura, the communications officer. And new for 1976, the aliens, Klingon. Their evil threatens the universe. Gorn, half human, half beast. Charon, is he good or evil? Neptunian, dangerous in space and in his own watery habitat. And the Keeper, his incredible intellect threatens the Enterprise. The Star Trek aliens.
Like, the Keeper at least, okay, fine.
Neptunian.
But Neptunian, the alien.
Well, how about the Gorn is wearing a Klingon outfit?
Yeah.
Well,
And you're like, what?
Maybe he killed
the
a
goofiest-
Klingon and decided that he was going to wear it.
The goofiest thing is that Dr. McCoy looked like Howard Cosell.
So if you're doing a bananas play
So
set,
you could
Well,
totally
you could
play
you could have
Monday
him play
Night
with
Football.
you could have him play with the Muhammad Ali doll.
I know
Yeah.
Jay.
So that would work.
Well, I'm
And
going
they-
to differ with you a little bit in the sense that, look, when I saw Spock shooting at an alien that I had never seen before, I didn't think, well, God damn it, that wasn't in the show. I thought, wow, they did stuff that wasn't even in the show. I wonder what that's from. I mean, and I agree. Yes, I
From
had
Clash of the Titans.
Right, I had the bridge play set, and I agree it was not exactly to spec.
Don't get me wrong, I played with
Right,
it forever.
exactly. That to me was the thing that was exciting because what I loved about those toys, what I loved about having those models, I mean, and honestly, my brother was the model builder. I was just sort of the model player and occasionally the model breaker. But I loved just imagining myself in that world, being with those characters or being those characters. When I think my favorite Star Trek merchandise item when I was a lad wasn't even something that was built as a model kit. It wasn't made by somebody else and sold. It was, and again, I'm talking about my brother again, but he started this Star Trek club, and he made uniform shirts that were actually pretty great for himself, for his friends, and for me. We had to sign an oath, and the oath. It was, the Starfleet oath, and we had to swear that if we detected any any Klingon or Romulan activity, we had to report it
Immediately.
immediately. The thing about it was, and I don't know why, if he was trying to send me a message, my shirt was red, but I still loved it, and I loved like dressing up and getting out my
Was
bridge
your
play
brother
set.
mustard?
Yes, he was.
See,
Of course he was.
he had to be the captain.
Yep.
You know, I still have an unanswered mystery about that original Mego bridge set. Of course, we all remember the transporter chamber
Yes.
that you spin.
Yeah.
And it had two sides. It was like the magic cabinet.
Yeah.
It came with stickers, moire stickers, yellow and black stickers that had a moire pattern on it. Did you put them on the outside surface of the cylinder, or on the inside surface, so that when they're standing in there, you have the moire behind them, like in the original
show.
transporter room? Which one did you do?
Okay, it's funny you bring that up
Oh boy.
because
Going deep cut now.
that
was something as a kid I did the inside first.
Me too.
And I realized it was wrong.
Well, it really didn't work the way you
The whole
wanted it
point
to.
was that I did one way.
Right.
And then I did the outside because the outside it was supposed to
It
create
was
the
supposed to
pattern when
spin
you
and
spun
create
it.
sort of a sparkly kind of look.
But
yeah.
again, as a kid who loves Star Trek, you're
Yeah.
like, oh, that's the pattern
Yeah.
on the wall behind the actual
Me
transporter.
Too. Me too.
And this was, again, you were supposed to be more enamored of the fact that you had this. I'm like, no, I wanted the transporter to look
Yeah.
like it looked in the show.
Right.
That was a huge thing, and I realized it was wrong,
Yeah.
and that the spinning thing didn't work. So one of my things was on the inside, and then I did it on the outside
Right.
with my other stickers because it came with 6 stickers.
How you doing, Ashley?
I'm doing all right,
What you
man.
up to? Good meetings.
Yeah, my
You
childhood
wanted to
was
do this
relatively
Trek
happy.
podcast. This is
my
what you
happiness
get.
didn't really make me angry.
But see, this is the thing, man. This is what kids. And by the way, we were in minorities of one. There was nobody we could talk
Right.
to or consult with.
Yeah.
Our friends. Nobody had these things but us.
Right.
You didn't go on the internet.
I tried. There was no internet there.
You had a
Kept
I had-
trying to
I
log
had-
in.
you had a cup with a string. That
I
went
had
across
my
the
Star
street.
Trek communicator, my light blue Star Trek communicator that was huge.
Yeah.
Right.
And I turned it on. I pressed the button for the alarm, and no one answered.
Did you have the command
1976.
console also?
I never had the
That was
command
cool.
console.
I had that.
Yeah.
That
That's
was
How
probably-
many of you taped Star Trek episodes with audio cassettes?
Absolutely.
Off the TV.
Yep.
Now here's my
100%.
question though, because we all did.
Yep.
What episodes?
All of them.
Well, I tried to do all of them. But
Really?
I couldn't
Yep.
buy enough tape. No, my parents would never.
Wow.
They would buy me a 5-pack of blank tapes, and that was enough.
I had Piece of the Action, Trouble with Tribbles, Balance of Terror. I mean, I only did a couple.
I think
but
I had all of those.
had Star Trek 2.
My dad let me use his reel-to-reel tape
Oh,
recorder
that's nice.
Wow.
from the early 60s, and I would record it on these big reels. And so I would have like 4 or 5 episodes on a reel, and it was the greatest thing ever. Of course, you couldn't connect it directly to the TV, so I had the microphone placed right up against the speaker. So occasionally you hear my mom yelling in the background, "Come to dinner," or something like that, which
Captain,
is
there's
also
a strange communication.
is also a wonderful record to have.
Yeah, totally.
But, you know, this is the way we had to experience Star Trek because you couldn't get it on video. We didn't know what videotape was.
you were lucky if you knew what episode was going to be on. If you didn't buy
Exactly.
TV Guide, you didn't know what they were showing that night.
Exactly. And this brings up what we were talking about before, was this is where we learned how to identify the episode from the first 10 seconds.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So we knew if we'd already recorded it or not.
See, what I loved, and I know a lot of fans hate this place, and it probably you probably not like it because it was not screen accurate, was the Mission to Gamma 4, which was the
Hated
Apple but
Right.
with Vol.
Yeah.
And because, of course, there was no hand that sees. But I thought for play value, it was really fun because it had those little David
Well, you
Soul
can get the
things.
You
and
can
it
get the
had
hand to play with the three-headed
the hand
snake.
could, you know,
It was too small. It was
and,
too
and-
small.
and it had, it had Vol. I mean, it was, for it
That
was a
wasn't
religious
Vol.
experience.
That wasn't Vol.
but it kind of was.
I knew
kinda
Vol.
was Vol.
That wasn't Vol.
Because you could have your AMT Enterprise in orbit firing at Vol.
Yep.
And, and it was awesome.
Captain's log, stardate 5122-6, on a mission to Gamma 6. Spock, Bones, Scotty, and I beamed down, not knowing what to expect. We approached the idol. Its jaws were moving. Suddenly, 5 Lilliputians appeared, each attached to the other. The aliens placed themselves in front of the idol. Strange animals tried to grab us. Bones was trapped in a man-eating plant. Suddenly, the floor gave way. I was in the cave. The Lilliputians were friendly. Mission to Gamma 6 was a success.
Yeah, I like that play set. I'm sorry.
Look, it's okay to like things, but it's also okay not to like things.
That's right.
So-
It just, it's just. I think it's just, on some level, it's a matter of perspective. It's a little like when I was a kid and first started discovering the Star Trek novels after, which I think
girls, but okay.
yeah,
Star Trek
yeah,
novels.
that too. But yeah, I appreciated the Star Trek novels first. Because I may have heard a podcast with you guys talking about this Star Trek, the motion picture novelization, and how bananas that was, and Vonda and McIntyre with like the entropy effect, and I would go and I would search
What
for
was
those
the
books.
name of that pocketbooks line that kicked off?
Timescape.
Yeah, there
That's
you go.
right.
You win. I don't have anything to give you, but
Yeah. It was always like, it was weird, like space hippies all over the place, but I loved it, and I kept. Anytime I saw anything like that, I thought it was wonderful. Whether it matched my exact recollections, and they were pretty goddamned exact, of what had happened in episodes or how I sort of perceived characters. It was more for me. I remember there were, and maybe I'm just remembering listening to my own recordings now, but I feel as though there were actually vinyl, like the equivalent of audiobooks for episodes.
There were Power Records.
Power Records.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I remember having
They were
those
comic
and
book
listening to
versions,
those.
yeah.
Right.
And the
But
late
they-
Neil Adams actually worked on it
Right.
at Continuity Studios. And in fact, the late Russ Heath did the art for some of them.
And there was the Gold Key comics.
There were the Gold Key comics and the collections. I never had the actual comics, but I had the trade paperback collections of
Right.
the Gold Key
And
comics.
a lot of the Gold Key artists had never seen the show.
Yeah,
So
which
there
was
flames
obvious.
coming
Oh my
out
God.
of the hangar deck of the Enterprise. But
Cora was a blonde.
I think what you brought up though was
and the backpacks.
Yeah.
Right.
For away team missions, for landing party
Yeah.
missions.
But I think the books, I remember I was in my elementary school library, Island Park Elementary School, and I found the James Blish novel Spock
too.
Must
Yeah.
Die.
Yeah.
Now, I had the James Blish, I had a few because not all of them had come out at this point.
Right.
James Blish was a science fiction author who did adaptations. He would adapt 4 or 5, 6 episodes in a book.
From the original series.
From the original
Yes.
series. And he wrote one original novel called Spock Must Die. And
Orange cover with the two spots.
yeah, and I remember finding it was like finding the Ark of the Covenant.
Yes.
Like it was a new Star Trek story that I'd never heard. I'd watched, I was probably like 8.
Because Mission to Horatius doesn't count because
That's
it was
right.
it was a young adult novel.
And
Right.
it never came out really anywhere. I never saw that book when I was a kid.
Oh, I had it.
Yeah, I had it too.
Yeah.
I didn't
But
have it.
Spock Must
A
Die
blue-
was
blue
the big
hardcover
one.
book.
That
Yeah,
was-
and what was interesting about Spock Must Die is it was so serious. It was one of the first science fiction novels I ever remember reading because I must have been 6 or 7 when I found it. And it was literally like finding so Star Trek novels to me were real. They were canonical.
Right.
Because it was amazing and the story was amazing. And then as more started to come out, you had things like The Starless World or World Without End, or David Gerald wrote The Galactic Whirlpool, I think that came out in 1977.
yeah.
But Star Trek novels became, because there wasn't ever going to be any new Star Trek.
And they were huge for Bantam. Frederick Pohl was the editor at the time. He wanted nothing to do with it because it wasn't real science fiction to him. But they sold so well, they couldn't put out enough of them. And then that's why when the animated series came and they did the log books, they were doing the same way they did the Blish books. But when it got canceled, they're like, how do we keep milking this? And they would start doing one a book, and he'd
Well,
have to expand it.
The funny thing is, I had an experience in the library discovering one of the Blish log books, and it was
Alan Dean Foster did the log books. And
no,
James-
right, yeah, this was the James Blish, one of the James Blish
Right.
adaptation books, and seeing the cover on this was all red with the Enterprise going overhead and that one guy in the red Star Trek uniform.
I think that's the
sort
cover of Star Trek 8.
I think you're right. He's just standing there, sort of looking, looking up into the heavens. This was so amazing to me to see it portrayed like this as a real thing,
Yep.
and that hooked me right at that moment. And I've never been the same.
Well, those
and
were
it ruined my
stunning
life.
paintings. And if you remember, they had the Star Trek Reader, which collected a couple of the books. That also had, was it Chelsea Bonestell? I don't know who did that.
I don't know. I
But
don't think it was.
It also had this blue, like this moon-like,
Right.
and the Enterprise.
Right, and a guy in a spacesuit.
It was stunning.
Yeah.
Well, and that was the funny thing is that Star Trek as this series, it looked a certain way, it felt a certain way, but these books really expanded the experience of what the
Right.
Star Trek universe was for any of us, because when you're reading a novel, especially a novel that you hadn't seen on television, just the way a novelist describes things and the emotions and the inner life that was given to these characters.
Not the inner light, the inner life.
No, the inner life that a novelist could write about was something that, for a kid, it was mind-altering, literally, about how you felt about Star Trek, because it, later on, children of the 80s, when they would buy toys, they already had a TV show that showed them how they were supposed to play with things.
Right.
But when you're reading a Star Trek novel as a kid in the 70s, there was nothing analogous that you had seen.
We had no guide to put it back together.
Absolutely. And it was
very hard to play Entropy Effect with my action figures.
Well, an Entropy Effect, that's a perfect example. I mean, that was the first book that came out after Star Trek the Motion Picture. But if you remember the space combat depicted in that book, where Sulu was playing in a simulator against other people, and
and there were fighters,
and the Enterprise would go end over end, and you realize that, oh my God, in a zero gravity environment, the Enterprise could be this way, and we'd never seen that depicted before. And suddenly, Star Trek became much bigger in your imagination than it was in the 79 episodes.
It's funny. I was just thinking that Spock Must Die was sort of the splinter of the mind's eye of Star Trek. You know how, like, after Star Wars, you just wanted more Star Wars, however you could get it. And Splinter of the Minds came out, and everybody thought, oh, this is the next story. This is canonical. This is how Darth Vader became Darth Vader. And it had that beautiful, artwork on the cover, and it was like
only it had been so
revelatory. And then, but it was the same thing with Spock Must Die, because they had just done the adaptations and then have Spock Must Die, which in retrospect isn't a great book, but like at the time it was like you said, the Lost Ark. And something that existed side by side with these Bush novels, of course, was a curious phenomenon of the 1970s, the photo novels.
That's true.
Which was also mind-blowing.
Mm-hmm. Well, it was like having VHS, seeing these episodes. Basically,
explain what a photo novel is for people who don't know.
I'm going to try. It's basically what they used to call fumetti, which is Italian for smoke. These smoke bubbles come up and give the dialogue of the people in the photos. And these were individual episodes that were put in book form, and they were I think edited by Richard Anobile, who gathered all these frame grabs, basically, these stills from the episodes, and put them in the order, and then put all the dialogue in. So you had basically a comic book version of the episode using original shots from the episode. And it was the best representation of the episode that you'd ever seen before. All of the photos look immeasurably better than you saw on television,
because they were so vibrant, and the books were heavy.
Because
it was that thick,
it was thick paper stock,
and the card stock on
and
the
it
cover.
was so much wonders to be looking at, because you could stare at one picture for hours.
Yep.
It
And
was the level of detail.
He would never seen before on television. Because remember, folks, back in those days, television looked terrible.
We had 1 pixel. And we liked
and
it.
We liked it. Sometimes it changed color, and that was exciting.
The Helicon days of low def.
Yeah.
But, the photo novels, and also they did one for Star Trek the Motion Picture, which is glorious.
That's a beautiful, beautiful photo.
And then, unfortunately, for Wrath of Khan, they went black and white.
To save money.
Yeah.
And
that was the beginning of the
terrible.
End.
That was
It was funny, though, at the same era, there were other movies, and if you look at some of them, it's some of the biggest movies of all time that got the photo novel treatment. Mm-hmm. But it was like stuff like Saturday Night Fever.
Yeah.
It's like
odd.
Who's reading that?
I mean, what do? You put on the Bee Gees and you read it? I don't know. And my favorite, though, is Nightwing.
Oh, my goodness.
How many of those do you think they sold?
They did one for hair, too.
Right.
Wow.
Without the nudity, I'm sure.
But I have to say the best of those was Close Encounters, which is absolutely glorious, if you can find them.
Well, the best one was Alien, because they expanded it to a larger and oversized paperback.
That wasn't the photo novel brand.
No, that's true.
Right.
But they did that. They ripped off Alien and Outland. Ripped off. Fox ripped those.
Yeah. No, that book was amazing.
Well, because Galactica came out, but it was the photo story. It wasn't it wasn't a photo novel. It was another company that was ripping it off.
But I think they did. Buck Rogers was a photo novel.
I think it was a photo story. I don't know if it was a photo novel.
Because I remember Galactica was, like you said, it was a rip-off.
Mm-hmm. But those were great photo novels,
They did Invasion
too.
of the Body Snatchers.
They did. They did.
Lord of the Rings.
Yeah, the Ralph Bakshi Lord of the Rings.
But I'll tell you something. Even the books in the 70s, I remember there's a book that came out, and I'm not going to put her down because she wrote the book. Her name was Kathleen Sky.
No more cracks about the book.
Kathleen Sky, she wrote a book called Vulcan. And the cover of Vulcan had Spock holding a hot, like, yeoman in another blue outfit with a phaser just like...
Now special Me Too
with a
edition.
phaser and giant ants
Right.
coming up toward him. And it was like a Frank Frazetta painting or Boris Vallejo or something. And even I as a kid, and Vulcan had an exclamation point next to
Right.
it. And even I as a kid, because I would scour the bookstores waiting for a new Star Trek
It's
book.
the musical Star Trek.
That's all a Vulcan in one big package.
I just looked at this book and I felt, even as a kid, I was probably 10 by this point, I was insulted.
Yeah, of
I'm
course
like,
you were.
don't give me this crap. Who put this out? Like, why would you denigrate one of my favorite characters of all time and have him holding on to
should
an
those
exclamation
ants.
point in there.
Yeah,
Don't
hot
we
chick,
know
an
Vulcan is
exclamation point,
exciting?
giant ants. It was just like
Giant ants.
it
Vulcan's
was
outlawing
insulting. It was
exclamation points.
insulting. I
And
hated
ants.
that. Go look it up. Look for the cover of Kathleen Sky's Vulcan.
You don't need giant ants to make Star Trek exciting. Haven't we learned that by
and
now?
thus, toxic fandom was born.
Well, yeah. I'll tell you though. Look, we got the cover of Spock Messiah. How great was that?
That was
cover?
pretty awesome.
That was an awesome
Although,
cover.
I will
like
say-
a burning planet with Spock coming out.
Yeah, that was pretty cool. He was very green on that
And
cover.
God Emperor Spock.
Yeah.
I would say though, Voyager could have used a
Children
few
of
more
Spock.
giant ants.
Could have.
Yeah.
But then Star Trek novels took a real weird turn with Sandra Marshak and Myrna Colbraith writing The Price of the Phoenix and The Fate
Which
of the
was in
Phoenix.
their universe, like fan fiction. It was so bizarre that they set those novels in the universe of their own fan fiction.
Right. And then they also did things like they edited the Star Trek The New Voyages anthology, where there were these fanzine short stories that were then collected into an
Right.
official...
I love that first New Voyages.
I did too. And
that had Mind Sifter in it,
Yep.
and one of my favorite short stories of all time, A Voyage
to a
to
Small
Visit to a
Planet.
Small
Yep.
Planet Revisited,
Yeah.
where it's about the crew of the Enterprise, the real actors.
Right.
It's Galaxy Quest,
Yeah,
basically.
Galaxy Quest.
And Shatner and Nimoy and D. Kelly find themselves on the it's Mirror Mirror also on the real Enterprise in the 23rd century, and they have to pretend they're not actors and fake their way through being on the real Enterprise. It's a delightful story.
Maybe that's Quentin Tarantino's idea.
I think that book came out in '76, and when I went to summer camp to Camp Orkila in Washington State, my mom put it in my suitcase. When I opened up my suitcase at summer camp,
Nancy.
there was the first. Where the Star Trek: The New Voyages.
Oh,
book.
see, I remember the bookstore I bought it at, but my parents didn't get it for me. Put it in my first summer
Yeah,
camp.
my mom put it in my luggage.
That's nice. And there was something else that existed side by side with these novels at the time, which we haven't talked about, but I imagine were a huge influence on us all pursuing a career in film and television, which of course was the double shot of Stephen Whitfield and Gene Roddenberry's making of Star Trek, along with David Gerrold's The Making of the Trouble with Tribbles.
Right.
Not only for us as writers, but for you
Absolutely.
as a
As a designer,
concept art designer.
It basically showed me that there was people who did this for a living.
Right.
And it showed me that this is, you can enjoy the show as much as you want, but there's people behind the scenes making this stuff and creating this from nothing.
I think that's the first time they had the signature where it was just stills from the and it was behind the scenes stuff. It was the first time I ever saw behind the scenes photos of anything,
Yeah.
let alone Star Trek.
Yeah.
And they showed the scenes from the Apple, where the guy gets hit by the
elements.
Oh yeah, how
Yeah.
they did the visual effects.
visual effects. And I remember that being But how many of those books did you go through? I think I went through.
I went
3
through at least
or
3.
4.
at
Yeah.
least.
Yeah,
Because
Yeah.
I read them. I took them to bed with me.
Yeah. And the binding
it fell apart.
disintegrated.
It's a pretty thick,
Yeah.
hefty book.
Yeah.
It's not as hefty as the 50-year mission, but it's pretty hefty.
Well,
And
I used to read it in Roddenberry's voice. All the capitalized paragraphs I would read in Roddenberry's voice. I wish I had the book here, but
I
don't.
wish I'd brought it.
Well, Ashley just brought up probably the two greatest publications, both from 1975.
Well, before you do that, I want to, because people don't normally mention this. Everyone says, Making of Star Trek, the Jaws log. But I got to give credit to David Gerrold's book, too, which was the first book that I think really shone a light on Gene Kuhn,
Right.
which was wonderful, very important. But also the evolution of a rewrite
Right.
where it tracked sort of the different drafts, and then ultimately had them in the book. So it may also be the first time I ever read a TV script, in that book.
Wow.
So I think that Making the Trouble with Tribbles book, really belongs alongside sort of Making of Star Trek as sort of a seminal, behind the scenes making of book. Because I always point to, the Jaws log Making of Star Trek in that book is sort of like the key, books in terms of, because people talk about Bill Goldman and Adventure of the Screen Trade, which is great, but it was really those books, I think, that galvanized, a career in writing and producing for me.
Well, isn't that interesting that you bring that up? Because the Jaws log and the Making of Star Trek came out earlier. Trouble with Tribbles came out about the same time as the Jaws log, but they were these 3 books, making of books. And I feel the same way that you did. And you too. You learned how the process of movie. I didn't know about the process. The making of Star Wars hadn't been on TV.
It was all mythologized,
and it was still this thing that you loved and you understood intimately. So you could make the leaps. Like when you're watching a TV show, you're still seeing it as an in-universe experience. Like you're thinking about the Star Trek universe. Whereas those books completely deconstructed that and showed, okay, there is a methodology and a process by which this imagination thing that we loved was created. So the juxtaposition of these two things were things that were instilled in us as children, even before we understood anything about how movies are made, per se. But Star Trek allowed us to get there before anything.
Yeah.
And it was fascinating.
I'm a little the odd man out on that. Not because I didn't read and love those books, but because, and I don't know what the explanation is, and it seems strange considering what I ended up doing with my life, but I never connected to those books as an experience of process. I mean, I found some of the things in the process fascinating. Like, I loved finding out that the Enterprise was originally called the Yorktown. It had a big ball on the front of it, and it looked
James
different.
Winter
It was
was going
supposed
to be the
land.
captain.
Yeah, and all that shit was that was incredibly interesting to me. But for whatever reason, I continued to access it and connect to it as Star Trek. And I don't know, I don't know how, I mean, it's such a strange concept because obviously I'm not delusional. It's I knew, Star Trek was a TV show and this was telling me, how it was made. But I never stepped outside of the experience of being a Star Trek fan when reading it. It simply added to the texture of it for me.
But what's interesting is that your career track is a little different than ours because, Rob and I and Darren, sort of both, despite some, zigzag and serpentining we went straight into film and TV.
Right.
You went into the sciences.
Yeah, that's true.
Which is, so before you became a writer and a screenwriter and a TV producer and showrunner and creator, you were in,
I was a math nerd.
You were a math nerd and you were doing, rocket science.
You were a defense contractor. Right?
Yeah.
So I don't know if there's anything to that, but
certainly, yes, in the sense that I was always most excited by the things that were most out there.
You were Tony Stark.
Pretty much. No, not at all. But it was, I think Star Trek fandom in a lot of ways made my mind more supple in terms of imagining what technology could do and how technology could solve problems. Or even in the context of even just talking about military problems, asking myself the question I always come back to with nearly every problem that I face.
War, what is it good for?
Right. Now, what would Captain Kirk do? Right. And, it's amazing, how many of life's mysteries can be solved by asking yourself, what would Captain Kirk do? But also, again, the fact that Star
Take
Trek
the phaser, leave the cannoli?
Damn right.
Maybe not.
And I love Italian, and so do you. No, I mean the fact that Star Trek was so concerned with science, that it was something that, look, I could access Star Trek more easily than I could access Star Wars. I love Star Wars, but I can picture myself on the bridge of the Enterprise. I can see that because I know that they are human. I know that they are from Earth. Right. I know that there is a shared history, and so by extension, there is this future that we share. And it was easier for me to project myself into it. So no matter what I think I've done in my career, that process of projecting and thinking about like how these characters and these situations and this technology that became so real to me in my head, how it helped me to think about new problems, to solve things I hadn't encountered before. And my God, like look at think about the toys that we had for just a second. We had our communicators. And we had our tricorders, right? It's like it's 1976, and you're walking around with like your little model communicator, and you flip it open. Well, that's weird. It flips open. Mm-hmm. Well, you know what? If you busted out your communicator in 2018 and you flipped it open, you would still get, well, that's weird. It flips open. That's because that technology is behind us, right? But all of that stuff is here. The only thing we're not doing is flying faster than light, projecting shields. We're not, obviously we don't have transporters. Right. Those things aren't there, but so many of the things that people just didn't understand, right? That we would get our asses kicked for playing with them or saying, hey, let's play Star Trek. Well, hell, we're all playing Star Trek now.
Right.
Well, that's what's so funny is that Star Trek wasn't showing the technology of 300 years in the future. It was showing the technology of 30 years in the future.
Yes.
And, which is why I don't understand this fascination with doing Star Trek prequels. Because for me, what was so intriguing about Star Trek was always this 15 minutes into the future. And so sort of anticipating what the world would be like. And now that's such fertile ground with social media and where that's going to go and with the advances that we're seeing. So, why keep doing a retro universe where you're not even willing to embrace the retro and, as opposed to boldly going, which is what Star Trek was always about. Because as you point out in the Star Trek versus Star Wars SmackDown, that Star Trek was always aspirational. You put yourself in that universe because it was Earth. Star Wars was, entertaining. It was not. It was not. You didn't really play Star Wars. Maybe some people did, but with Star Trek, you
just did it you did it in a different way.
Yeah, you would fight with lightsabers because it was fun, the same way you would do, Robin Hood or King Arthur or whatever, But Star Trek, you really created a world, and Star Wars was very different because I think Star Wars you're on the outside looking in and loving it, but Star Trek you're almost in the inside looking out. It's really interesting point that you brought up.
The line that haunts me, the prediction that haunts me from Star Trek, comes from the season finale of the first season of Star Trek: The Next Generation, when Data says television is a form of entertainment that didn't last long past 2025, and I think about that, and I'm looking at my calendar. It's 2018, and I'm thinking, what? Broadcast television might not make it past 2025.
We now call it Netflix.
Yeah,
yeah. No,
but it's on my tricorder.
Yeah,
well, I think one of the things that we sort of talked about already is that certainly in the early years of Star Trek marketing and products, they were very based in letting kids be creative and imaginative. For example, the Starfleet Technical Manual.
Mind-blowing.
God, I love the Dreadnought. I still want to see it.
Right?
Oh my God.
I know.
I mean,
I want to see that starbase.
Yeah.
All the things that actually fed into your imagination rather than took it over, rather than replaced it, which I think a lot happens today with, get off my lawn, video games and stuff like that. I think that it encouraged kids to expand their world rather than limit it.
Let me ask you a question. The technical manual was 75 or 76?
75.
75. So I already had the blueprints.
Right.
And I remember, to this day, and I was fairly young. I don't remember a lot from that. But I remember as though it was yesterday,
Too much LDS.
Walking into a bookstore, knowing and seeing this on the shelf and like turning it. I was with my aunt. I remember it with my Aunt Beth. And I said, you have to buy this for me. Not can you buy this for me, please? You have to buy this for me. And I still have it to this day, that original hardcover.
Me too.
Yeah, me too.
And I'll go back from it from time to time, and it had that United Federation of Planets flag in it. But the Dreadnought was fascinating.
Right.
And
then it got to be a novel, and I was so excited. I was like, Peter Coyote and E.T. It's like I've been wishing for this since I was 12 years
We
old.
should, in Starship Smackdown this year, in San Diego. We do a panel, a beloved panel at Comic-Con every year. We've been doing it for 15 years, this group of people and some more. Starship SmackDown, which has just gotten bigger and bigger. This year we had over 1,000 people packed the room, and over 1,000 people. And we should have the Dreadnought.
That's a good idea.
Because, and then people say, but I thought you guys only do real ships. We'll be like,
it's real to us.
It's real to us, and we've wanted to see this matchup since time immemorial.
But but the thing about, I think we should do that. But I think what you pointed out about the two things about the technical manual and the blueprints that blew my mind was they were done and made as if they actually came from the 23rd century.
Right.
Yeah.
Yes.
It was not
They're
like
in universe.
Yeah,
Yes.
they're in universe. It wasn't like this is Star Trek with a big picture of Kirk,
Right,
Spock,
right,
McCoy.
right. Yeah.
I mean, sure, the Enterprise blueprints had the picture of the Enterprise, but once
And
you
it
took
even
out,
had a note
Right.
in the beginning
Yeah.
From the
that
Commodore.
said that from the Commodore, we are giving this to you in the ancient paper form,
Right.
so that you can have an interesting look at how things were done back then.
and as a kid, even the way the blueprints all had the registration numbers as if they were signed off by Starfleet, you got something that you felt
was from the
was
future.
absolutely from the future and real that only you had. I mean, you knew other kids had
And
it.
pre-desktop publishing, pre-Photoshop,
Yeah.
and it's remarkable how authentic it is, how cool that whole thing is, and it's really funny because I agree with you about the in-universe. Like that's one of the things I loved about David Goodman's autobiography of Captain Kirk. That other than his brief introduction, I think at the very end, it's totally. In universe, it never is sort of like winking at you or saying this is Star Trek merchandise or whatever.
But it was so mind blowing because there was like the Articles of the Federation.
Yes.
And it had all this political stuff that certainly wasn't for kids. It was for anybody, and how they actually made it.
We have to shout out to the great late Franz Joseph Schnaubelt, who created the blueprints and the technical manual.
Yes.
He did this all by himself, basically, and he drew every page, and it is unfreaking believable. I mean, he kind of started out as a fan artist, and turned it into this moment in history that I will never forget when I first saw those, and they're just amazing.
And
arguably accuracy aside, because they weren't accurate to the TV show, but who cares at that time?
But we didn't know that yet.
We didn't know
I
it.
mean, it was like.
Plus, then they refit the Enterprise, and it looked totally
No,
different.
didn't it
So,
have like
yeah.
the two turbo shifts on the bridge, and everybody was
Yeah.
like turbo shot, two
I kept
turbo
wondering where the
shafts
hell
on
that
the,
other one was.
Yeah.
on the,
Where
I
did they
know.
put it?
And,
Where is it?
and then they ended up putting the two turbo shafts into Star Trek: The Motion Picture, which
Then-
made sense, and multiple transporter rooms,
Right.
which you never understood, even as a kid watching The Enemy Within. They got one transporter room, and they can't, where whether they're not sending down a shuttlecraft, and or do they want Sulu to die? I mean, is that what they did? Shatner hates Takai so much he just wants him to freeze to death? I don't know what's going on.
That's Takei.
I think the last thing that the piece de resistance was inside Star Trek: The Record album, where Roddenberry talked, and you actually heard
Inside Star Trek.
Is that where
the
you
creator of Star Trek would
began learning?
We talked about this in another episode of this. That's where my Gene Roddenberry impersonation began and ended, because it was fascinating hearing the great bird talking with Kirk and Sarek and
I mean, it was mind-boggling.
McCoy. It was amazing.
That's a good thing for Election Day. Sarek of Vulcan, how do you vote?
So how do you think, as children who were so influenced by this show, how did all of these things work together on our psyches?
It was the perfect storm, wasn't it?
It really was. Is that what? I mean, kids today, you play a video game, you've got everything in front of you. You don't have to imagine.
No, because they're so accurate. They're so photoreal that it's like everything. They're telling the story for you. You're not using your imagination to picture anything. But it's not like when we had these little pixel, like, on Atari 2600, you would imagine that, those 10 squares were a dragon. And you got to imagine and create this world. I mean, because adventure was our Game of Thrones. It was incredible, right? And now everything is so... You don't have to do any of that heavy lifting.
Let's not turn it into kids these days. I think that the experiences are different for kids today. I think they are equally as valid. levels of excitement and engagement.
Well, they have better
they
toys.
certainly are.
They have
I mean,
better toys.
Yeah.
I mean, you should see my 9-year-old like doing his dinosaur smackdowns. It's bananas.
Yeah.
But animated dinosaurs do not qualify.
No,
so,
they
like,
don't.
Puff
Not
the
real.
Magic Dragon, it does not count. Peach
Not
Dragon,
Dragon,
does not
right out.
count.
Totally.
Only real dragons.
Only real
Vermithrax or whatever the hell.
Vermithrax.
Vermithrax pejorative.
I can never get that right.
You know, for me, I think this is why, you know, I keep saying I had this different experience with like this things that weren't to spec than Rob had.
Right.
It's not that I wouldn't have loved it if they were to spec, but I think in some ways it was easier for me to project myself into this world that meant so much to me because I wasn't overloaded with detail.
Right.
Because I wasn't sort of standing back and going, wow. It's kind of like talking about a dog standing up on its hind legs. You know, it's like the thing that's amazing about it isn't how long he stays up there, it's that he does it at all.
Right.
And if you're just kind of, you know, fixated on, wow, that dog is really standing, you're not thinking about, you know, the fact that he did it at all, which is really kind of the miracle.
Well, I have to say, you know, we've gotten through a decade of Star Trek merchandise.
And
There's
we
so
haven't even
much
scraped the
more
surface.
to talk about. I think we're going to have to come back and do a sequel episode because, of course, there's the amazing Playmates toys in the 90s.
The Rick Sternbach technology.
You know, the Mike Okuda's wonderful Star Trek Encyclopedia. There's and Rob still to this day reads all the Star Trek novels.
We never got to my love for my Star Trek the Motion Picture McDonald's Happy Meal.
Okay, well, that falls within the first episode. We should talk about that.
Okay.
Because, of course, that was a huge thing. But Star Trek was always considered niche, right? McDonald's doing a Happy Meal for Star Trek the Motion Picture was a huge thing.
And it was the first branded Happy Meal.
For you parents who don't speak Klingonese, he's saying, people of Earth, unite and bring your kids to McDonald's for a Star Trek meal. That's a regular hamburger, fries, soft drink, a McDonald's and cookie sampler, and a Star Trek prize. Oh, yes, 5 different boxes based on Star Trek the Motion Picture. Action scenes, jokes, games. He says, take it from a father who knows. His kids love him. McDonald's Star Trek meal available for your kids now.
The first one ever.
That's right.
Because they had started Happy Meals earlier, but it had, you know, generic.
Mayor
Right.
McCheese.
No, they didn't even. They just had Happy
No?
Meal.
Yeah.
No,
What about
not
the
even
Hamburglar?
not even the characters on it.
It
They
was
didn't
just
have
a way
any of
of
that stuff.
prepackaging
Yeah.
The
like
Grimace?
a burger.
They didn't
and
have
fries.
any of
They
that
didn't
stuff.
have any of
on
that
it.
stuff.
It was just plain.
Wow.
But when 1979 rolled around, they started the Happy Meal with Star Trek on it and beautiful artwork, crappy toys, but you know they had.
But they were
Good.
and
The
they were
glasses
ours,
were good.
and we
Remember
loved
the
them.
glasses?
Oh,
Yeah,
yeah.
the glasses were amazing.
And by the way, the
Yeah.
toys though were the 12-inch figures were amazing.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
To
But
get those was like
that wasn't
wow.
McDonald's, but yeah.
No.
Yeah, no.
But I mean, you mean the toys inside the
the
Happy
toys
Meals.
in the Happy
Yeah.
Meals.
You
Yeah.
think the
They weren't
Grimace was a
I loved
hut?
them.
I think absolutely. Grimace was one of the huts.
I think so.
Oh
Grimace
my
the Hut.
goodness. Well, I think we're going to have to return to this another day.
Well, because I think Burger King later on did Star Trek as
They did.
well for Con, didn't they?
I don't know if anyone did Con actually.
Yeah, maybe not. Maybe it was for Star Trek 3.
Taco Bell did Star Trek 3. I remember those because
I never liked Star Trek 3, and I
had the-
never will.
They had the fancy glasses. Those are probably the best glasses that were ever released. Actually,
The Taco Bell glasses.
the Taco Bell glasses.
You know, what is amazing to me is I guess they did a survey recently among the American public about what their favorite Mexican restaurant is, and the answer was Taco Bell. And the fact that we allow people to vote, it makes it much easier for me to understand how the election went the way it did when people are saying their favorite Mexican food is Taco Bell.
But wait a minute. I think, though, that's a good point in the sense that most Americans don't have the experience of Mexican food because,
Anywhere.
they don't. If you're living in the Midwest, Taco Bell's the only Mexican restaurant.
You're not from
unless
Texas
you're
or
going
California.
to Chevy's.
You know what I just
Or to some extent, Arizona.
or wait, what was the place? Free Enterprise?
That was
Chevy's. Oh,
it was
that was
it
Chevy's
was
before. Another place we put out of business.
Yeah, yeah.
Chevy's is gone.
But that's the thing. You don't-
Cartoonsville.
You go around at some places they don't. Well, you live in California, so and Texas, Mexican food's a big thing. But you know, in South Dakota,
nowhere else is it.
I'm very concerned about the fact that we will no longer be getting advertising from Taco Bell. I think I've made a huge mistake.
Well,
So
Well,
we
you know
can
what?
fix
I'll get
that.
it back by saying, you know what? Sure. Is Taco Bell is it really a feast that's fit for a king? No. But when you're a college student and you can get like tacos for 99 cents
It's
and you go,
perfect.
It's the
damn
best
right it
value
is.
for your money.
You're damn right
That
it
is true.
Yo
If you
Caro
want
Taco
Mexican
Bell.
and you can't spend a lot of money, you could do worse
And
than
they
Taco
had the
Bell.
best Star Trek glasses back in the
You're
day.
damn
so
right
shut
they
up.
did.
And
Like,
Star Trek-
I went to Taco Bell specifically to get those glasses.
Taco Bell double-decker tacos are really divine, I have to say.
See, the places I ate as a kid, like Wendy's and Roy Rogers, they didn't have movie tie-ins.
That's true.
So I was sort of screwed on that front. So maybe I just resent the fact that you, who went to Taco Bell, were able to enjoy this wonderful Star Trek
Probably is.
gift that I never
jealousy.
got.
Well,
It
so
is.
thank
It's
you. Thank you,
pure,
Taco Bell.
pure,
Thank you
pure
very much.
jealousy. And but we'll come back. We'll talk about the Playmates toys. We'll talk about the wonderful pocketbook Star Trek line, which goes on and on and
this
on
day.
to this day. Yeah, it's hugely successful. What are some of the other great Star Trek?
The DC comics that came out after Star Trek 2.
Yeah.
Sure.
Which
Mike
Conan,
Carey
they were very prophetic. They were the first people to put a Klingon on the bridge of the Enterprise.
That's
I think
right.
we
I
gotta
remember
save
that.
all this for the next
And of
podcast.
course,
right.
the Malibu Deep Space Nine comics that I worked on a bunch, which I loved, and I'm very proud of those. And of course, Eagle Moss is now doing these beautiful
which are amazing.
ship replicas, everything from the classic ships to Discovery, and they all look great.
And they're making bigger ones now.
Yeah, I know. Along with their Galactica toys, they just came out with the original Viper. It's freaking awesome. I'm going to get you one. And yeah, so there's a lot to talk about clearly, and we will revisit the Star Trek merchandising mania because Star Trek was arguably never bigger than it was in the 90s. When you had the perfect storm of Next Generation appealing to families, the launch of 2 new shows with Deep Space Nine and Voyager, and the movies. It had gone from being a niche show for nerds, if I may say, to a huge mainstream show. And so we'll talk about that era.
nominated.
What?
Emmy nominated.
Emmy nominated in its 7th and worst
And
season.
Generations was on the cover of Time magazine.
Indeed, and that was sort of the beginning of the end in a lot of ways. For it was sort of the top of the mountain, in a sense, in
top
terms
of
of
the
its
glass pyramid.
popularity, in terms of mainstream attention. Some would say qualitatively, it's very interesting. So we'll definitely talk about that. But I want to thank you guys so much for being here, and we're going to have you back very soon because, of course, we have brilliant raconteur, filmmaker. Blogger Rob Meyer Burnett, who you can follow on Twitter at
Burnett RM. Find me on Instagram at RM Burnett, or subscribe to The Burnett Work on YouTube to watch my new upcoming show, Robservations.
and he did that without ever spending $1 million for a marketing consultant to come out with that. He came out with that all on his own. What about you? You have Lore currently dropped on. It's not airing because
Right,
TV is
'cause there is
dead
no
as of
air.
2025.
It
but
streams,
streaming
it
on Amazon, Lore. And what else can we be looking out for?
Just look out for me on on Twitter
When
at
you're driving?
Master0 when I'm driving, especially when I've got 3 kids yelling at me from the back seat. Just
So
watch yourselves
out
out there.
for Ash.
And Darren, they can find you where?
Find me at Twitter at DarrenDoc1R.
And of course, you can follow me on Instagram and Twitter at Mark A. Altman. Also, my best-selling 2-volume Star Trek series. You can follow us at 50 Year Mission Book on Twitter as well to find out the latest with future editions as well as the upcoming paperback versions of 50 Year Mission. On behalf of myself, Robert Meyer Burnett, Ashley E. Miller, and Darren Doctorman, thank you for joining us for another episode of Inglorious Treksperts, and engage.
Good night, sweetheart. All my prayers are for you. Good night, sweetheart. I'll be watching all